Why would anyone go to war, a real war, with weapons, ships, and soldiers, over pepper? Not gold, not land, not ideology. Pepper. The thing sitting on a little grinder on your kitchen counter right now. I want to take you on a short journey through history, because hidden inside that question is something that exactly explains the world we're living in today. Every era in human history has had two things in common. A resource, something that every civilization needed, something that gave whoever controlled it enormous power. And there was always an infrastructure, a route, a road, a sea lane, a trade corridor, a network through which that resource moved. The civilizations that understood both of these two things and acted upon that understanding, they rose and dominated the world. The civilization that ignored them, they fell. Let me show you how this has played out again and again throughout history. The Persians were among the first to understand this at a grand scale. Around 500 BCE, Emperor Darius the Great built the Royal Road, a 2,700 kilometers crescent-shaped highway connecting his empire from the Mediterranean coast all the way to the heart of Persia. Fresh horses were stationed every few kilometers. Messages could travel from one end of the empire to the other in only 1 week. Of course, merchants followed. Taxes flowed. The Persian Empire became the greatest and the largest the ancient world had yet seen, not just because of its armies, because it actually understood the power of connectivity through a well-established infrastructure. Later, the Greeks learned from this. Athens built its power around the port of Piraeus and made themselves the connectivity hub for that age's resources. Grain would come from the Black Sea, olive oil and pottery went out. The infrastructure was developed to be able to control the sea lanes. Whoever controlled the sea lanes accumulated wealth. More wealth meant the ability to build more fleets. More fleets meant controlling more sea lanes. And then came Rome. Rome took the infrastructure game to a totally different level. Roads, aqueducts, ports, you name it. Control the network and you control whatever moves through it. Goods, armies, information, taxes. And again, more wealth, more fleets, more control. Then in the 7th century CE, something astonishing happened. From the Arabian Peninsula, the early Islamic Empire was born, it emerged and expanded at a speed that stunned the ancient world. Within only few decades, the early Islamic Empire had absorbed Persia, pushed the Byzantine out of Egypt and the Levant, swept across North Africa, and reached the Iberian Peninsula on the west and the Central Asia on the east. Along with this expansion, this new emerging civilization sat at the crossroads of the world's most highly valuable trade exchange networks. With this trade came something even much more powerful. A civilization that at its peak did not just use this advantage to accumulate wealth and power, but actually used it to create institutions of knowledge and share it with the rest of the world, shaping human knowledge for centuries to come. Now, so far, we have seen what happens when civilizations understand the power and the importance of resources and infrastructure. Before we move further, I just want to take you through some examples of what happens when the civilizations see the shift coming and then just choose to ignore it. Take Ming China, for example. At the early 15th century, China had the largest and the most sophisticated and advanced naval fleet in the entire world. Admiral Zheng He was leading voyages across the Indian Ocean, reaching Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and even the eastern coast of Africa. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, the Ming court of China decided to turn inwards. The ships were grounded. The voyages were canceled. The fleet that once controlled the sea lanes was left to rot. Within only few decades, the same sea lanes that were once controlled by China were now actually being controlled by the European powers. That's what led to what was later known as the Century of Humiliation. The Mughal Empire was another very good example. At its peak in the 17th century, the Mughal Empire was extremely rich. It actually controlled more than 27% of the entire world's economic output, more than all of Western Europe combined. It was extremely wealthy, culturally rich, and militarily powerful. But it was a land empire in a time where you had to be a sea empire to be able to control the infrastructure. The Mughal Empire did not have enough interest in naval fleets, in sea trade corridors, or in the new sea lanes that were being carved across the ocean. And so, a trading company, the British East India Company, came in to fill the vacuum. Not an army, a corporation. And by the time the Mughals understood what was happening, it was just too late. And then there were the great Ottomans. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire was the most sophisticated state in the whole world. It was a literal bridge between the East and the West. But then when the Industrial Revolution came in and transformed Europe's economy and military, the Ottomans were not fast enough to respond. By the time they tried to recover, it was just extremely late. Three of the world's most powerful civilizations, and one common mistake: they all failed to recognize the power of the resources and infrastructure of that age and act upon that recognition. Basically, they were all caught sleeping. This is not ancient history. It's a pattern that repeats itself, and it's actually repeating right now. That's what we call imperial hubris. Now, let's go back to the question I asked you at the beginning. Why would anyone go to war over pepper? Simply because it was the valuable resource of that age. In the medieval world, spices were everything. They preserved food, allowing armies to be fed on long campaigns. They were the medicine of the time. The pharmacies of medieval Europe were basically spice shops. They were the internet of their times, carrying cultural exchange, economic power, and political influence across continents. At that time, whoever controlled spice routes, you would control food security, military readiness, economic growth, and ultimately the cultural fabric of civilization all at once. That's why wars were fought over pepper. Actually, in the 15th century, the spice trade was the most profitable business on earth. It was controlled by a chain of Muslim merchants, Arab traders, and the city of Venice, who were all located between the Spice Islands in Southeast Asia and the hungry markets of Europe. 1 pound of pepper in 15th century London would cost a skilled worker more than 2 days' wages. Nutmeg was worth more than its weight in gold. When the Ottomans in 1453 took over Constantinople, they actually ended up closing the most direct overland route to Europe. Europeans were in huge trouble. They basically looked at this disruption and they did not only see a problem, they actually saw an opportunity. They asked themselves, what if we could bypass the middleman entirely and go directly to the source? So the European search for a new route became extremely urgent. The Portuguese went south across the coast of Africa. The Spanish went west. When Columbus sailed in 1492, he did not sail because he was looking for a new world. He sailed because he was looking for a shortcut to the spices of Asia. What he ended up finding, however, was something entirely different. What Spain ended up finding changed everything again. The resource was not only spices anymore. It was gold and silver in amounts that no one had ever seen before. From the mines of Potosi in modern-day Bolivia, a flood of silver poured into Europe. Spain became the wealthiest empire overnight. New resource, new rules, new power. Then in 1498, when Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Africa and basically managed to find a direct way to India, Portugal finally had its direct way to the spices of Asia. And by doing so, they made the old trading network almost irrelevant overnight. Now, let's move forward to the 18th century. We had a new resource, coal. By the 19th century, Britain was mining 2/3 of the world's entire coal mines. When the steam engine arrived, Britain had the fuel to be able to power it on a level that no other nation was able to match. Then we had another resource, oil, and with it came the 20th century, with all its wars, alliances, and instabilities that unfortunately we're all familiar with. Again, new resource, new infrastructure, new power. Then something very interesting happened. The internet. Many people in the 1990s thought about the internet as just a faster way to send letters. What it turned out to be was the new infrastructure, the new sea lane that transformed the new world's resources, information and data. Today, more than 95% of the entire world's data going between continents actually goes through undersea fiber optic cables on the ocean floor. The pattern did not change. We are still talking about sea lanes. Only the sea lanes have moved from the ocean surface to the ocean's floor. Now, let's talk about the new big thing in our time today. AI. Those AI assistants that make us all feel like an Iron Man's Tony Stark talking to his Jarvis are becoming more and more a very important and irreplaceable part of our lives. And just like in the 15th century, pepper was not just a seasoning option on a kitchen counter, AI today is definitely not just a software tool. In its essence, AI is a system that processes the world's most valuable resources today, information and intelligence. Today, AI is involved in almost everything. It controls food security through precision agriculture. It impacts military power, with almost every major military in the world today racing to integrate AI into autonomous systems. It is restructuring finance, medicine, governance, and education. Today, AI is the new resource and infrastructure of this age that every single civilization is racing to control. Actually, one of the key agenda points in the recent May meeting between President Xi and President Trump just about a month ago was actually about how to divide the AI cake without going to war. History teaches us what happens when the infrastructure of an age is controlled by too few, without checks, without balances, without wisdom. The monopoly of the spice routes produced literally centuries of extraction, slavery, and colonial suffering. The monopoly of oil produced wars and instabilities that we're still living through today. Every single time one power held the choke points of an age, the entire world had to pay a very heavy price. If we do not move fast today, AI could be added to this tragic list of monopolies. Let me show you how. This is actually what happens when you type a question into an AI assistant. Your request travels to a massive data center. That massive data center operates on one of only 4 available cloud platforms. The specialized chips required to operate that data center are actually almost all produced by only one company. The AI model that processes your request is designed by handful organizations that are almost all located in only 2 countries. However, there is still hope. Because the window is not yet closed. The infrastructure of AI is not yet fixed. The world's largest, youngest, and most dynamic populations are not just passive consumers. They are users, thinkers, builders, and they have whatever it takes to be able to be shapers of this industry. Countries like Turkey, sitting at the crossroads between Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, with a thriving tech industry. Nations like Pakistan and Indonesia, with hundreds of millions of young people, with a very fastly growing digital ecosystem. Malaysia, quietly positioning itself as the AI infrastructure hub of Southeast Asia. Nigeria, a thriving startup scene with a demographic wave that's positioning it to be one of the most consequential countries by 2050. Just like history shows us what happens when the world's resources and infrastructure are controlled by too few just to accumulate wealth and power, history actually as well gives us a brilliant example of what happens when the civilization in charge decides to use this advantage with wisdom. Baghdad in the 9th century. In the 9th century Baghdad, under the Abbasid caliphs, it was actually what one historian called the Cambridge, Oxford, and MIT of its age all at once. The House of Wisdom, Baytul Hikmah, gathered scholars from all over the world, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Greeks, Persians. They all came together to translate the original scripts of ancient civilizations into Arabic, and then build upon them to create breakthroughs in mathematics, astronomy, physics, medicine, and philosophy. Those same texts were later translated into Latin to build the foundation for the European Renaissance. Here is the lesson of Baytul Hikmah. When you control the infrastructure, when you control the sea lanes, you accumulate wealth. When you accumulate wealth, you can choose to build institutions of knowledge and share it with the rest of the world. Because when you do so, you don't only rise, you lift the entire world with you. The lesson was never about who invented the original texts. The lesson was about who had the wisdom, the ambition, and the right cause to be able to harness this knowledge and create a beneficial opportunity for the entire world. Every era in human history has had to master its sea. The periods of greatest human progress were not the ones where one civilization took over just to accumulate wealth and power. They were the ones where the civilization in charge understood their responsibility. They built the ships and sailed, not to conquer, but to connect, not to hoard, but to share. Today, we are at a critical moment of history, whether AI becomes another tool of division and concentration, or whether it becomes another house of wisdom, open, shared, and generative. This is the question that is on the table today. And I believe this time we can get the answer right. But it will take people who understand what this moment is about. People who actually have studied enough history to be able to see the pattern. People who want to make this world a better place to live in, not only for themselves, but for everyone. Thank you.